welcome back to the session post-lunch. This is the 9th edition of the Hindu Lit for Life Festival. First up, we have Suki Speaks, a cartoon character shares a journey, an illustrated talk by Manjula Padmanabhan. Manjula Padmanabhan is an author, playwright, artist, and cartoonist. Her weekly comic strip, Sukiyaki, appears in Business Line, a Chennai-based financial newspaper. She writes a weekly column about her life in the US called Here, There, and Elsewhere in Blink, the Saturday magazine of the Hindu Business Line. Her books include the novels Escape and The Island of Lost Girls, centered on gender conflict in a brutal future world. Over to you, ma'am. Please put your hands together for Ms. Manjula Padmanabhan.
Thank you for that introduction. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm not terribly sure how this is going to be, because this presentation is something I put together in the last 10 days. I have never made a presentation of this type before. And what I'm hoping is, I'm not very sure that you can read the script. And if you find that you would like me to go back to a previous slide, you can. There are at least 50 images, so I'm not going to be lingering a long time. And my purpose in this presentation is to introduce this cartoon character, Suki. And my plan is that it's her presentation. I'm just the cartoonist. And she's going to tell you about her life. So what I plan to do is to read what she says, because my concern is that you can't actually read the script much. And in any case, since this is her presentation, I will give her a voice. But so when I say I'm not referring to myself. You've just got to accept that. So here she is. This is Suki. She says, "Hi, my name is Suki. And I'm the main character in a comic strip called Sukiyaki. I appear on Saturdays in Business Line, a newspaper belonging to the Hindu group in Chennai, India. This is my creator. Her name is Manjula Padmanabhan. I call her MP. In fact, she never says anything to me. But for this presentation, she says she calls me MP. We are often told we look alike, but I disagree. I should mention here that Suki has done this before, and she did it 400 years ago when Eve's Weekly was in print. Eve's Weekly did a cover on me, and Suki appeared on the cover and drew a mustache on my face. So this is a thing that she does. This is the story. So now, once again, it is Suki speaking. This is the story of my life, even though I'm not exactly alive. Let's call it my origin story. My first appearance in print is right now. We'll follow my evolution as a character, the other characters who join me, and finally a little bit on how MP being me, draws me. So this is my timeline. It tells you where and when and in which newspapers I appeared in print. Suki started in 1982 to 1986 in the Sunday Observer in Bombay and appeared weekly. 1992 to 1997 in the Pioneer Daily. When I say daily, it's 6 weeks daily, not 6 days daily, a week, not 7 days. And 2016 to the present in Business Line in Chennai. The first strip in which I appeared was in the Sunday Observer in Bombay. It was called Double Talk. The editor was the late, great Vinod Mehta. The city was Bombay when it was still called that, and the date was December 1982. This was the first strip, the first time I ever appeared in print. Let's take a closer look, shall we? I'll split it into two. This is the upper panel. The first thing you might notice is that the script is unreadable. It was unreadable even in the newspaper. There's also the messy quality of the drawing. The lines don't always join up. The frame lines are irregular, and the so-called joke is really kind of weird. But this was the very first Suki cartoon. This style of drawing went on for weeks, but eventually small changes began to creep in. By week 14, for instance, the script was slightly more legible. From where you're sitting, it is still completely illegible, but in the newspaper, you could actually read it. You could read it a lot better, and the words are not so close up. By week 36, the frame lines were straight. For me, that was a huge change because I had to use a ruler to draw the lines, and I had to, there were photocopiers were not common household items. So in the early days, I actually inked in the frame lines each time, each week. By the 50th strip, I had a talking frog as a friend. The frog was a favorite character. He appeared for the first time in this strip, but he remains a character who keeps appearing in the strip. By the 75th strip, that is in the second year, some characters appeared without me at all. So the frog in this case is talking to a little dog. And I'm very sorry that you can't see the... I had kind of hoped that it would be a big screen. I didn't realize it would be a small screen, but I can't help that. What? You can see it? Okay, all right, I believe you. So every so often it's me speaking, but otherwise it's supposed to be Suki. So the best thing about Double Talk was the huge size of the strip. It was 4 columns across and about 6 inches tall. Actually, I would say it's around 8 inches tall. It gave me the freedom to have moments like this, for instance. She liked to do that. And this was in the second year. Suki put on a lot of weight, and for many weeks she looked like a balloon. And the whole strip took up just that. And actually, it was in color, but I don't have a copy of this in color. And this, which may be my favorite strip from that era, was also in color. And I had this is now not Suki speaking, it's me. My editor did not expect me to, he never asked me to make changes. He never told me what to draw. He never gave me any direction whatsoever. So I could do what I liked, and sometimes I did. In 1985, MP, that is me, moved from Bombay to New Delhi. Double Talk continued for a while, but in 1987, I was no longer in print. I remained in limbo for about 6 years. Then in 1992, Vinod Mehta took over the Pioneer in New Delhi. As soon as MP heard this, she sent a request to revive me as a daily comic strip, and he agreed. So I began to appear in the Pioneer 6 days a week. It was wonderful. I loved being back in print, especially because of being 6 days a week. The size of each strip was, of course, much smaller than Double Talk, but appearing daily allowed me to explore space in a different way altogether. Like, for instance, this one about Python fashion models. This was day 1. So you've got to imagine that in the newspaper, this strip appeared above a whole column of strips. It was at the top of that column, and it appeared one at a time. So this is day 1. This is day 2 and day 3. You can see that the plain-looking python, the python's name is Kundalini. The plain-looking python is being advised by a fancier friend that he must he must look a little more fashionable. So he goes to a boutique called Pythonesque and meets with a rattlesnake who is the owner of the boutique. And you can see in the next, in day 5, the python has been given dots, which the rattlesnake says is fashionable for that time. And in day 6, he's given the bill. So Suki says, culminating in day 6 with a punchline that I'd had 5 days to build up to. It was a real luxury. That is, again, this is me speaking. Many people ask me whether it wasn't a lot of effort to draw 6 cartoons a week, but in a sense, it's not really any different to drawing one, because you have to think of an idea for a week, an idea that lasts 1 week. And whether I drew it in 6 separate strips or just the one strip, it takes a little more time, but not really very much. And in terms of developing a story, it's really a tremendous luxury to be able to go for one day after another, and presumably people are reading the strip one day at a time, and they're getting a little bit, a minor kind of joke every day, and finally ending with what I hope is a punchline. But it was a tremendous luxury, is the only word I can think of, to have that space. And for the strip in The Pioneer, Suki says, I had lots of friends, some old, some new, and over time some of them appeared on the strip as characters in their own right. You can see there's a woman called Bertha the Big. Bertha was a lady of large size, and she was happy to be large. She really resisted the fashion for thin fashion models and thin women's bodies, and she reveled in her large size. And she also filled the comic strip so much that I only needed to make 2 drawings instead of 4. And I can see that there are a couple of friends here who know me well and who know that I'm an exceedingly lazy person. So those strips where I had to draw less were very popular for me. Anyway, this is Suki. Suki says, the Pioneer strip was called Just Suki. It ran for 5 years. And at the end of that time, a lot had happened. As we all know, in the 1990s, a lot did happen. The main thing, however, was that Vinod Mehta left the paper. I remained in print for some time, but a cartoon strip needs to be supported by an editor. Eventually, I had to retire. What I don't say, what Suki doesn't say, perhaps because she chooses not to know, is that for the whole of the last year when Suki appeared in The Pioneer had stopped paying freelancers. So for a whole year, neither I nor other freelancers got any money. So Suki literally starved. Of course, I did not starve, but there was no money to pay for the cartoon, and eventually it had to end. So Suki says, then followed 18 years in the wilderness. People would ask MP, where is Suki? And she would say, she's chilling. And that's what I was doing. I was chilling on a beach, chilling and chilling and chilling. Until one day, and 18, there's those red marks in the back are supposed to be calendars, okay? So until one day, 18 years later, editor and award-winning children's book author Sandhya Rao, featured there, spoke to MP, that's me, and she said, hey Manjula, how about writing a regular column for us in Business Line? And I said, wow, yes, thanks, but instead of a column, supposing I revive Suki. Now, I will have you know that this conversation took place just down the road in my sister's house on Harrington Road. And Sandhya really did come over. She came over to have tea and to ask me if I would write a column. And I said it just like this. I said, yeah, I'd like to write a column, but how about Suki? And she said, great idea. Let's ask Editor-in-Chief Mukund Padmanabhan. For those who don't know, please be sure that there is no relationship between Mukund Padmanabhan and but I will say that Mukund makes things much more confusing by calling me sister. Whenever he sees me, he says, hi, sis. And this is to confuse everyone. Anyway, I have no brothers, but Mukund is my virtual brother. Anyway, so Sandhya and MP go to meet Mukund, and he says, yes. And it just, again, it happened just like that. We went to see him, he gave us tea, we talked about it, and he said yes. And that was fabulous. And since then, Raghavan Srinivasan has taken over as editor of Business Line. He has very graciously permitted me to stay in print. And here we are. This is the first strip in my new and current home, Sukiyaki in Business Line. Sukiyaki is the name of the strip as it appears in Business Line. It appeared on February the 13th, 2016. It was a Saturday, and initially it had 2 frames, but after the second week, it was expanded to 3 frames. And I'm not going to show you frame by frame because obviously, it's been over 2 years. We are almost at the 3rd anniversary, and it is great to be back in print. The strip's appearance has changed quite a bit since the early days. If you remember back to the very first strip, it is now looking very different. But I've not changed all that much. I have the same fuzzy hair, baggy clothes, googly eyes, plus I've stayed the same weight and the same age, which is 25, for 36 years. Nice trick. Of course, as you perhaps can tell, that's Suki, not me. And now, as promised, I will end with a brief description of how MP draws me. In the past, she used waterproof ink, pens, and watercolors. All that has changed. So here's the basic setup for creating me. A sheet of A4 paper, a pencil, a pen, an eraser, and an eraser. It's just regular photocopy paper. It's not special paper at all. It's just regular photocopy paper with frame lines copied and stored in advance. The mechanical pencil, I use a mechanical pencil, not a wooden pencil. A mechanical pencil has a tiny 0.5 mm lead. The pen I prefer is a microtip felt, but any old pen will do. Quite often it is any old pen. The initial pencil drawing, now, there is a drawing on there, but you can't see it. It's intentionally very light because I don't want the pencil marks to remain visible. I'm going to blow it up a bit. This is an enlarged version, but it's still very light. Can anyone see it? Yes. It's once more. This is the best I can do for the moment. It's the most basic stage of the artwork. Here, MP has completed all 3 panels in pencil. She sometimes makes notes on the side about dialogue. This is the last bit of work I'll do in pencil. Next, she'll ink in the lines. Inking in the pencil lines is not difficult or time-consuming. The tip of the pen is pretty much the same width as the pencil line. Can you see? Is it visible? So here's the completed drawing inked in. Pencil to ink takes about 20 minutes at the most, after which MP erases the pencil marks. Here's the same drawing after I have scanned it to my computer. From this point on, she will complete the artwork using her computer and an electronic stylus, a type of pen connected to a tablet. They are the equivalent of a keyboard for a graphic designer. So this is it's not 3 separate strips. It's a strip in 3 stages. The next few images will show the sequence of adding color. That's the first one. I've added color. In the second one, I've added some speech. You can see the speech. And speech bubbles. And so those 3, the 3 previous ones are on this side. And then in the last one, you can see I have added a background. the background, there's the ground, and then there's the sky behind the bear. And stars. The stars are a separate operation. And finally, because it's not ready yet, I add my signature. And MP, she signs each strip individually, and that completes the strip. It is now complete, and this is what I send to Business Line by email. And this is what appears in the newspaper. From this to that takes about 5 hours. And most of that time goes into composing the text. This is a point that I make routinely when people ask me about the comic strip. When people think about comic strips, they nearly always talk about the drawing, but a strip is 90% the text. And if I could go back and forth between the images and show them clearly, you'd see that without the text, it's you can't have a response to it. It's just pictures. And another point I like to make is that there is a very great difference between these words that people use casually, like sketch, cartoon, illustration, cartoon strip, comic. For people who produce these things, that the different range of things, these are all very different. They're not the same. So when I say cartoon strip, I mean something that has typically, not all cartoon strips have text, but most do. And the text is very much a part of the cartoon. It's very much what makes the finished product complete. Without that, it would just be drawings without meaning. And in this sense, a cartoon strip a comic is very different to an illustration, because typically, again, these are loose terms, they're used loosely. Typically, an illustration is used to accompany an existing text, whereas a comic or a cartoon, again, typically can stand on its own. And a cartoon strip is, in a typical sense, something that appears at a regular schedule in a newspaper and will have text. And certainly for me, composing the lines for the cartoon, which is what, as you can see, I did it after doing the drawing, but while doing the drawing, I'm thinking of the text. And usually that is something that I'm thinking about well before the time I sit down to make the drawing. I am composing. I very frequently have tight deadlines because I move around a great deal. So I have to organize my week so that I will get the 5 hours to sit down to complete the strip. So in order to save time, I am often composing the text well in advance, but I really only write it at this point, when I have finished the drawing or when the drawing is half complete, and I start to compose the text so that it'll fit into, because there's very little space. And the whole trick to finishing it is to get the idea that I'm working with to fit within that space and not take up too much of the area of a speech bubble. And with that, we come to the end of this little journey. So that's the end. Thanks for listening and watching.
Thank you for that session, ma'am. The session is now open for questions. Would you be kind enough to answer? So if anybody has questions, please put your hands up. Our volunteers. Yeah.
What's the origin of Sukiyaki? I mean, why Sukiyaki?
Why Sukiyaki or Suki? Because it's two separate. Okay. So Suki. At the time that I created Suki to begin with, I knew that I wanted a short name that was not an existing name. It needed to be a pet name, but not a pet name that I had heard, because I didn't want to be reminded of a particular person. And I was also very keen that the name should not suggest any communal background. So you can't really tell what she is. The Sukiyaki came about in Mukund Padmanabhan's office room because it was all happening so fast. It's just like, yes, we can do the strip. What are we going to call it? And it's going to appear in a week. So it's like, I didn't have anything ready, but I'd had a few ideas in mind of what we might call it, and we didn't analyze it about why because Sukiyaki was one of the suggestions I made. So if I had to analyze it, which I didn't, it's because the name Suki is there, and Sukiyaki we all know is a Japanese dish. So it refers to food, which is an interest of mine, and of course it has the word yak to talk, like it's a very silly sort of pun. Okay, go ahead.
May I?
Yeah, sure.
How much of Suki is MP?
Oh,
and has Suki changed over the years?
Yes.
Thank you.
So in the very beginning, in the first strip that you saw, at that time, I did consciously think of Suki as my alter ego. And currently my hair is long till here, but between now and 1982, my hair has nearly always been extremely short or much shorter than this. But at that time, my hair was long and bushy. I had much more hair than I have now. And so when I first drew her, she was meant to be representative. But in the months that followed, she definitely, and I used to think of her as I, with a pseudonym that is Suki. But as the months and weeks went on, she did do some of the things that I did. Many of my friends in real life used to appear on the strip in caricature. They didn't like it. I had to stop doing that. And then the break came when I went away on a trip. I went away for a few months. I came back, and Suki was still away. And I met people on the street who said, "Oh, you're here." And I figured, okay, this is the time. We live different lives. So I would say now she is not me. She lives her own life. She has her own friends. And she also has her own temperament. She is more excitable than I am. I'm not excitable. She has stronger views than I do. I'm very much more a pacifist, and I don't tend to have quick reactions as she does. I would never jump in the air, for instance. Yeah, hello. Yeah.
What tempted to be a cartoonist, ma'am? Then why particularly Suki?
The way I can answer that is that I, like many children, always used to draw. I went to a boarding school for 3 years in Kodaikanal. And in school, as anyone who has ever been to a boarding school knows, anyone who can draw is used to make posters and so on. So as one of the kids who could draw in school, I was always doing that. And I made caricatures of my friends. And in fact, I can even now recall in my mind, Vasundhara Sindhya was my buddy in school. And one of the very first cartoons I ever made was of her face, because it fell very easily into a caricature. It makes a very easy caricature with the hair and the very big eyes. And but I then, having done her, I did many others. And when I came out of school, again, I can't easily encapsulate why, but I took it into my head that the most important thing for a young person is to be self-employed so that they are not dependent on their parents. So as soon as I came out of school, it was my agenda to make a living and to live separate from my parents. And it seemed to me that I had to use whatever gifts I could draw. And so it seemed to me the obvious thing for me to do would be to make a living as an artist. And I very soon realized that to be an artist in a gallery, that takes a lot of time and effort, and also capital investment. You need a lot of money to actually make paintings. So in the meantime, I began selling drawings in any way I could. And that meant because as I said, there's a very big difference between making art, which is for yourself, versus selling art to earn a living. These are separate activities. And publications, newspapers, magazines, they buy art. So I set myself that as a target. Meanwhile, I of course have a secondary life as a writer, but the writing was going to be pristine. I was not going to write for money. I would draw for money, but write for, my soul. So I began, but at the time that I was doing illustrations for magazines and sort of quasi-cartoons, again, it began to occur to me that if I had a comic strip, because I used to read a lot of comic strips. I'd been reading strips from the time, my father was interested in comics. So because of my father's interest in comics, we had a lot of really fancy comic books in the house. And my father, as a little boy, he used to cut and paste into one book a diary. He pasted a comic strip called Curly Wee. And he kept them, and we read them when we were grown up. And it left a very deep impression that this is a worthwhile thing to do. So I grew up outside India, and we had access to the International Herald Tribune, which had an entire page length of comics. And, I used to adore to see comics. So it seemed to be something that I felt I could do. I just felt I could do it. And so I approached Vinod, and he said yes.
Hi. Where do you get your inspiration for the text? Because you have to think of new ideas very frequently. So have you gotten stuck sometimes?
Never. I always explain that I think in pictures. So if we could see a computer screen of my head, there'd be pictures and text. There's a running text. All my thoughts appear in like subtitles in my head. So as far as I'm concerned, it's just I just cut and paste. But that's why the reason it takes a long time is, for whatever reason, the text editor in my head is very wordy. By the time I write it out on a screen, it physically takes up a lot of space. The one thing I have, you're not asking this question, and it won't occur to anyone to ask the question I'm about to offer you. People who know that I'm also a playwright have often asked me, how did you learn to be a playwright? And my answer is very simple. I made comic strips. And a comic strip is a dialogue. Because just like on stage, you see actors moving around and they speak. And there was, I remember it very clearly, a moment early in Suki's strips where in the action I had in mind was that Suki would give a flower to somebody else. And in prose, a character would say, I'm going to give you a flower. In a strip, she doesn't have to say that. She just hands the flower to another character, and they can say something else. So it was a realization that when you can see the characters, you can take the dialogue, you can cut the dialogue to not talk about what they're doing as you would in prose, because in prose you have to describe, you can't see what they're doing. On stage and in a comic strip, you don't have to describe it because you're drawing it. I don't know whether I've actually answered your question, but... Yeah, but they come from the same stable.
Yes, ma'am, I was about to ask something you just answered. Because
Yeah.
in your recent work, I found there's a the dialogues and drawings, rather the text and drawings are not well balanced.
Okay.
I could see more, text than the drawings.
Okay.
Usually, when you see a cartoon strip, the dialogue first, I should go to the figure, then slowly move to the dialogue.
To the dialogue.
But it is happening the reverse. Why it is so? Does the idea draining, or something like this happening to you?
Probably it's just the editor in my brain is not doing its work. And what can I say? Laziness. I'll try harder. also, I have to say, with Double Talk in Bombay for whatever 4 years, I got feedback from the readers. It was mostly violent feedback. It was mostly telling me how terrible the strip was, how worthless, how difficult to read, impossible to understand, not funny, etc. The thing is, getting that feedback was crucial to working with the strip. And in Delhi and currently in Business Line, I don't get feedback. So I really don't know which items work and which don't. It's very much, I do post on Facebook, and friends on Facebook do react. That's very helpful. But for instance, you've said this. As far as I'm concerned, that really helps me. You will immediately see a drop. One line. But thank you.
If I may?
Yeah, sure.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
Just one question. Does Suki make her presence felt in the other characters that you ever portray in your drama? Or
Oh, yeah, no,
novels?
not at all.
No. Not even subconsciously.
Oh, I can't speak for my subconscious.
All right. Thank you.
Manjula,
Yeah.
other than Sukiyaki, do you have a favorite comic strip? If
You
so,
mean
which one?
Other people's strips.
Other people's, yeah.
I have so many. It's like I really don't like to name any particular one because then it seems disloyal. So I will go back a long distance and say that one of the first, it is not a comic strip that I don't believe it was published here, but there was a cartoonist called Al Capp, C-A-P-P, and he was very big in the US in the 60s. He had a tremendously satirical form of humor, and I saw him when I was 11, 12, 13. And I remember we had just moved into a house where the previous occupant had papered, placed newspaper in the shelves, and I was clearing out the shelves, and I saw this comic strip, just a small strip. It completely filled my mind, and it's called Lil Abner, Lil, Lil Abner, and the drawings were done by a brilliant artist who went on to make. I didn't realize that Al Capp didn't draw them, and I loved this strip, but then. In the same newspaper, they published Modesty Blaze. Now, Modesty Blaze is not a comic strip, it's an adventure strip. But between Modesty Blaze and Al Capp, I think I got a very powerful comic education. Of course, Calvin and Hobbes and, all of these. But these are, for me, they're wonderful and I have loved them. But I don't think my strip really owes very much to these comics at all.
Manjula?
Yeah.
Hi, it's me.
Yeah, hi.
Hi. Manjula, if I were to speak about your books and ask what each one of them tries to do, I think you'll be able to tell me that. Can I ask the same question of your strip? What is it trying to say? Or is that a bad question?
It's not a bad question, but it's not a question that I've often or ever to answer because I've not done this before. I have never actually presented Suki in a public forum in any sense. I have once before this, when people ask me, I've done a presentation of my artwork, so then I've done that. But I've never actually talked about Suki. So I don't have a prepared answer. And I would say because of the deadline, which it flows through my life, okay? So I might be doing any kind of thing, I might be traveling, it doesn't matter what, I'm going to meet my deadline. And a lot of what appears in print is the result of deadline pressure. I'm amazed that there aren't more proofing errors. I live in terror that something will actually, I think at least with the business line strip, I think there's been one proofing error that has made it to print. But deadline pressure is a great thing in one sense because I don't get a chance to overthink. But if I had to express, and in fact, I don't especially want to give a kind of theme for Suki, but I can say more easily what it is not. I don't ever want it to be political, because we do a lot of political in India. A lot of cartooning is assumed to be political. Now, cartoons always have some political context. I mean, I don't know that we ever pause to think that the Western cartoons that we just consume without thinking about it, they fill our lives with middle-class American or sometimes British values. We are exposed to Christmas and Halloween without even thinking that these are not things that we, in a regular sense, see in our lives. I know that I just kind of put in what interests me, and I do edit out negativity, and I do that quite consciously. There was a moment back in Double Talk when I was doing, a series of frames where Suki has just woken up. She used to hate to wake up. She has just woken up, and it's, each statement was a negative, like it's the bright sunny day, but oh my goodness, the pollution, and this, it went like that. And I had finished drawing it, and I was getting to a message, and it was right then. I kind of took an executive decision. I just decided she is not going to be negative. That's all. I'm not going to defend it. It was just a decision. I believe I express a great deal of negativity in my writing, so it's out of my system. I think we are getting there.
One question I have here.
Yes.
Yeah, it was quite fascinating to listen to you talking about how you moved away from Suki, or the other way around.
We disengaged our lives.
Kind of. So in the subtitles that appear as thoughts in your mind, is there any way that you can tell that these are Suki's and these are yours? And is there any conflict while separating them?
No, not at all. Because doing the strip is a very specific. It's work. People sometimes don't recognize that an artist cartoonists, however much we draw because we like to draw, if you're meeting a deadline, it's just work. It gets framed in the workspace in my mind. So we don't. She's she, and when I sit to draw her and write the strip, there's a little kind of conversation generator that goes on, and it produces words specific to that. I might sometimes have a stray thought which I collect for using in Suki. It'll go that way. But Suki doesn't affect me. Not much anyway.
You have any more questions?
Hi, Manjula. This is not a question.
I just want to say hi, Sadhana. Lovely to see
Manjula,
you.
Thanks. I've always considered Suki to be a working colleague because the day Suki appeared in Sunday Observer, my first article in Sunday Observer appeared. So
yes.
We have grown together there. But I just want to share that Vinod Mehta, being the editor that he was, reveled in all the hate letters that used to come to the paper, and therefore a sizable chunk, half the page in the edit page was devoted to letters, and half of those, at least 50% in the initial stages, were for the hate letters that came for
the newspaper.
Suki
yes.
cartoon.
Suki.
What is this? We don't follow. Is this not even funny? Etc. Etc. And it was great fun engaging with that, because
Yes.
it meant readers were engaging with what you were doing. And reflecting on that, what I'd like to say is that there are not many cartoon strips in India or cartoonists who are within quotation philosophical. They're political, but they're not necessarily philosophical. One outstanding example was in Malayalam, Aravindan, the great also filmmaker, and his constant for almost 6 years, the back page of the Mathrubhumi called Cheriya Manusharam Vele Logu, Small Man in a Big World. Very reflective not in a, how do you say, a sense of purpose like Vaishnav was saying. It was just reflective on what was happening around. And to me, what you were doing and what you continue to do is part of that. And therefore, it's a very unique position in the universe of cartooning in India. And it addresses two things that I have always come across. I have engaged a lot with cartoons and written about them. But two questions that always come. One is that women can never be funny. And two, misogynist positions. Women can never be funny, and women can never be philosophical. I think you blow that myth brilliantly. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a lovely note on which to end. I've had my 5-minute warning, so I'm going to wrap this up. But I need to make one small point. Comic strips, because people often ask me, why are there no comics or very few Indian comic strips? There's only one simple reason. They need editors to support them with money. So the thing that most people don't realize is that the syndicated comic strips, the Western comic strips that are published, they cost very little. They cost the newspaper very little. And when I say very little, I mean at the level of 1 rupee per strip. So if, for example, if I had to compete at that level, that means I'd get 4 rupees a month. Obviously, I can't do that. So when an editor chooses to support a cartoonist, they are making a financial statement in favor of a particular kind of humor. So, all praise to the editors who are willing to do that, because it is an investment that not many are willing to make. And it's something that the reading public has no idea about, that there is a difference in comic strips, that the syndicated strips from abroad, they cost nothing. They cost the newspaper nothing. But those like myself, they are an investment. And it means that somebody somewhere has supported that comic artist. So anyway, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for that amazing peekaboo into Suki's journey. All of us found it inspiring and we enjoyed it thoroughly.
I hope so.
Yeah. And we now break for tea. The next session will begin at 3:30. See you all back here. Thank you.